Hello and welcome to another episode of AppSec Serialized, the podcast about web security and those who practice it. Today, as always, I'm joined by my co-host Ryan.
What's going on, everyone? It's good to be back.
And we have a very, very special guest today. Joining us is Cenk Kalpakoğlu, and he is going to be speaking with us as the founder of Kondukto, a company that, as of just about 2 months ago, almost to the day, was acquired by Invicti, and we are really, really looking forward to his presence. So, Cenk, when you started Kondukto, it was a while ago, right? When did you originally found the company?
So actually, we are one of the early movers in this space. We released our first ever version January 2020, just before the COVID happened.
Nice. So it was a while ago. So you've been cooking this in the lab for a while, and yeah. So when you started, ASPM, Application Security Posture Management, probably wasn't yet an industry term. So it's not like you set out to fill a particular segment. You set out to solve a problem. You're a guy who knows a lot about security, and you had the background to be able to say, this is something that we wanted to solve. So if you went back to the earlier days, how would you describe what the mission of the company was before we had even any idea of what an ASPM is?
Yeah, so just like many security solutions, we started to develop this solution in order to solve our own issues. Because earlier I was working as an AppSec consultant, and my main motivation is to develop a tool. It was not a product back then, it was just a tool that helps me to provide better or easier consultancy services. And the mission was not building a startup. Mission was let's serve more customers in our consultancy company in a better, quicker, and more efficient way. So that that was the early mission, and I would say I see a pattern in all the other or most of the other security companies, which a tool that comes from a need and becomes a product or vendor later on. And obviously, when we started, the ASPM was not a thing. Even the industry term didn't even exist. And the earliest, the closest industry concept was ASTO, Application Security Testing Orchestration, and which mainly focused on automating and orchestrating SAST and DAST and SCA tools, because back in the days, that was the main requirement from the industry. So at that time, the conversation was mostly about the coverage and automation, not focusing on the posture management. However, I would say from my vision or from a Kondukto vision, we were always having a wider or broader perspective, but we just didn't know back then. And so you know very well, those industry names usually comes later and often defined by Gartner or the other security research and advisory firms. So after ASTO, Gartner experimented another term, which was ASOC, Application Security Orchestration and Correlation, which they decided to put the correlation piece. However, correlation was a fuzzy word. Everyone was having slightly different meaning, and eventually became an ASPM. And by adding the ASPM piece, this is where we are actually. And the funny thing is that Gartner was heavily betting on ASOC. We were working with Gartner pretty closely. They said that they are not going to change the name. However, 1 year later, we have a new term, ASPM. But okay, no worries. So my question to you guys, when you were usually engaging with the customers prior to even Kondukto acquisition, what was the common pattern from an integration perspective? So what was your approach back in this, and how you were dealing with?
Yeah, I can definitely take that one, Cenk. So, first of all, it's great to have you on the podcast and within Invicti, right? I've really been excited these last few months, really seeing the evolution of, as you mentioned, ASPM, even from the last 2 months, right? So as you mentioned, right, it's, changing terms, completely developing, and it's really, really awesome to see that perspective and seeing how the industry in general around application security is completely, going crazy, and it's really awesome to see. But what I'll say is from our customer standpoint, right, when we have historically talked about integrations and with Invicti, right, we've always been that leader in, integrations, right? We've had over 50 out of the box integrations, and we mainly look at, we broke it out into categories, right? So issue tracking, CI/CD, some project management in there, as well as like privileged access management for, your form authentication and things like that. But I would say, the main thing is being able to scale, right? And one thing that organizations really wanted to start to get into is how do we build trust between developers and security? So when I look at integrations from what we've had, it's first and foremost giving the most accurate results into issue trackers, right? Because we want to make sure that the issues are being prioritized and actually have good findings, right? Zero to low false positives. And with our obviously proof-based scanning, we can do that. So we can able to push those integrations directly up into Jira, ServiceNow, Azure DevOps. And that's been a huge first step, I would say, for organizations to get into the development lifecycle, right? Putting fixes and asking for remediation from developers. And the cool thing about those integrations that we've had historically is not only a one-way, but a bi-directional. So not only can we push out issues right to an issue tracker, but when the developer fixes that tool, they can click done, and a webhook will actually come in and do that retest. So that's been a really cool aspect that a lot of our customers have taken advantage of because of the usability and with how they are scanning today. And having that CI/CD approach, right? So as customers, and I'll be curious from your experience, but what we've seen from a CI/CD perspective is, it's a little hard sometimes to get security into development and getting them to incorporate it into builds, right? So, making sure they're pushing out from a CI/CD perspective. I would say, once development teams become super advanced, they're more willing to, send out a scan from their CI/CD system, from their pipeline. And, that's one way that we've been really doing the core set of integrations. And recently, before the acquisition of Kondukto, we brought in a integration with Mend, right? So we started to experiment with the, intaking of different vulnerabilities from SAST, SCA, container vulnerabilities. And that gave us a whole new perspective on how we could correlate, how we could, make a, DAST finding and those confirmed DAST findings and bring those into and correlate to a SAST finding, making sure that we can find confirmed finding with a line of code. And it gave us really good insights on and what the future could be, right? Which really was, as you said, ASPM, right? Not only orchestrating, not only sending issues, but a full posture of everything you have from all your different scanners, adding in threat intelligence. So obviously, I've had an amazing last 2-3 months of handling the ASPM tool that you all spent blood, sweat, and tears developing, and it's really, really awesome. So flipping that back on you, Cenk, your approach to integrations. So first of all, how many do you all have from an integration standpoint, and what are some of the most popular sections that you see within the integration landscape of the ASPM tool?
Yeah, good question. So we realized very early that integration would be the most critical pillars of an ASPM platform, and particularly playing well with big players, obviously like Invicti. And I would say Invicti, NetSparker, Kinetics, those are the first ever integrations that we built. Our goal was to connect everything or as much context in order to provide better decision-making processes for the security teams. And obviously this should be seamless. And to move fast, we developed our own internal toolkit that partially auto-generates some of the business logic that an integration provides. It was not much, however, it was helping. By the way, this is way early than the AI and vibe coding. Now I assume it is even easier. However, when everything was still manual, those internal toolkits was creating a new module for us to focus on the juicy stuff, the internals of an integration. And usually back in the days, we were able to develop an integration in probably less than 2 weeks. And this integration power was one of the main driver on our strategy as well. And we hit, I think, more than 120 integrations pretty quickly.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Oof. Yeah.
I mean, so it's a lot. However, in our opinion, the real value is not coming from the numbers, but it's the depth more important.
Yeah, and that's really true, right? It's what you integrate with is so important. And Cenk, I have a question. Like, based on what the customers of the Invicti ASPM product are using, do we see patterns, right, where tool choice changes as organizations scale? The reason I ask is, you and I have both been at startups, and we know that at a startup, you're not necessarily going to get that top shelf magic quadrant upper right vendor, right, for every single point solution. But there's a way that you start up, because everybody, any organization at scale, security is one of those things that unifies the software needs of everybody who builds code. Security is binary, right? It's either secured or not secured. And so even the tiniest little gap can end up costing you a lot for your business. So my question is, what patterns do you see? And do you see kind of like your smaller SMBs using more open source tools, maybe your enterprises using best of breed? What have you found are the most popular integrations with different customer segments?
Good question. And absolutely there is a pattern. However, I would say it is not mostly on the company size, but tool choice is often shaped more by the security maturity, maybe the team structure, industry regulations is also important driver, and also even in internal culture. So not just the headcount alone, but all the other factors creates a pattern. However, one interesting pattern we have seen is that in our early days, big enterprises were kind of hesitant to use open source technologies. But right now, they are more open to use that, and I would say this changed dramatically. And our vision was always to cover both of the ends. So if you are a security-wise more mature company, more engineer-oriented company, we built our product to fit those needs. However, for more an SMB kind of an approach, or if you are just testing waters in the security world, more autopilot or automated stuff was also available on our platform by our orchestration capabilities. And an example would be, let's say you're just building your security posture. We were helping our customers to create an DevSecOps pipeline together. And once you enable these pipelines, you have everything automated, scanners, processes, and even some of the workflows, onboarding, everything was handling easily. And from a big enterprise perspective, our approach was to change, or with the minimal effort, let's integrate to your existing security stack, and without disturbing other teams, let's play well together. That was our main approach. But yeah, there are, and I would say the trend is always changing. Even from the popular tool perspective, Ryan, you ask which tools are popular from an ASPM wise, and I would say earlier on that was the SaaS solutions, but with this containerized world, with the Kubernetes and everything, I would say image scanners are getting more and more popular each day in the customer base, which they are focusing on the low-hanging fruit that impact a lot. So that's what I believe. The trend is always changing.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's really interesting is, and Dan, you mentioned this, is as a startup or any company in general, they're going to look for all different types of solutions, whether like all from a security standpoint, all different types of scanners, and as we know, with the vibe coding days or just mass product evolution days, so many different companies are coming out of the weeds and being created with different approaches to security, right? Which leads integrations in an interesting place, right? Because if more are coming out, then how do we support all of these different integrations that are spinning up, right, to really accommodate our customers? Because if data is coming in from an application security standpoint, we want to make sure we have all of that information. So obviously we can't build them all as soon as they come up, but I know something that is in the tool, and it's around custom integrations. So how in general is your approach, and what did you see the biggest inspiration for creating these custom integrations? And did it have to do with the evolution of scanners out there and so many new ones popping up? Can you give us a little bit more information on how the ASPM approach uses these custom integrations and intakes all that information for really to see the magic happen?
Yeah, so one thing we saw again on early days while working with big enterprises, as the maturity increases, security teams tends to play existing solutions and maybe invest on those to create their own solutions. So this is pretty common that secure companies, they even build their own scanners in a few different reasons. And from an ASPM perspective, there is no way for us to cover all those missing points without knowing the output, right? So we decided to release a feature that covers all those missing points. And our custom integration was the answer for that. So what we do is that we just receive a JSON file or any parsable input and map those fields with our existing fields. Since our approach was to convert data into a known format, we applied the same technology over there and released this feature for not just a certain security category, for all the other categories are also supported. So this means that if you have your own tool, or if you decided to change a tool, maybe with an existing plugin, maybe with yourself, we are covering those because this is how mature people secure their organizations. And frankly speaking, I can even remember a couple of open source solutions that started in couple of our customers, and they were that good that eventually end up being used by the community as well. So this happens a lot, yeah.
That I think that's an interesting the one part you mentioned, because I'm thinking about it from all these different companies coming up, but not even thinking from the approach of these big organizations, big enterprise companies may have a dev shop that's like, hey, create us a security scanner, create us this type of scanner with that output. So it's definitely really interesting that part of the approach is now coming up and being thought of. So I wasn't even thinking about that approach, but I've seen it. Yeah. So it's good that is something that is definitely available as well.
One more thing about this, we also started to see that right now enterprises, they are using AI or any kind of internal AI solutions either to validate or to improve the output, or to use as an end result or as a trigger, etc. So we are living in an interesting world, and more customization in the future, in the horizon. I can see that. So I have one question. Since right now, as Invicti, we have our own internal ASPM, how we are using Invicti, a security solution embedded into our SDLC at Invicti. So how we are using our own solution is my question.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. As an engineer, one of the things that I care about is security that's not just performative, right? We want it to have real results. One of the things that we've done at Invicti is we have tried to move those processes, instead of being something that you do at the end of a release, right? Instead of something that you think about later, it is so much more efficient to have that stuff inside of the CI/CD pipelines, the continuous integration, continuous deployment, that when something breaks, it breaks early. It doesn't break when you're going to release. You don't find out about a vulnerability or a dependency that hasn't been updated. You never want to find that out from your customer. You always want to fix that as soon as possible. And frankly, for an engineer, it is way, way less meetings. If you fix like a big security vulnerability quickly, all's the better. I mean, anyone who's written code has stared at a 0 day in their editor. And sometimes you wake up and you just fix it, right? And that is compounded in complexity and impact the further that you let it go. So one thing that we've done, and we've got more details on this in season 1, we had on Paul Good, who's an internal AppSec specialist who has built some of these things that we do for our internal usage. We have we use our ALM, our source control system has integrated into kind of common pipelines that are included across all these different projects. And what they do is they run our various tools. We're a security company, so we care about best of breed, right? We want to get something that's really good from one category. And frankly, we use our own stuff, right? When we're doing DAS, when we're doing API testing, we'll totally favor our own tools. But the downside is that if you want the best of breed, it's a real pain to log into N different UIs and triage them. Everything's a little bit different. And we all know as an engineer, you just want to get stuff fixed. You don't want to have that friction of having multiple panes of glass, multiple things. You forgot your login for this one. Oh, is that one SSO? It's friction. And to get work done, you want to reduce that friction. So what we have tried to do is try to keep everything kind of centralized, and also in a way that lets us use different tools but present a common interface to those tools. And one of the keys there is also integrating with the tools that developers use. So rather than forcing you to kind of go view a vulnerability, hey, if you could just get that in your normal flow, that's all the better. We have a dedicated project for our issue tracking software where we can just dump in all these different findings so that engineers can see them. They come from different sources. They're made to kind of look like one thing, even though there are many disparate choices. One of the things that Invicti ASPM has that I actually am kind of excited about is its strong integration with the CI/CD pipeline, because fixing things earlier in the life cycle, it's really so much more efficient. There's a tool called the KDT that allows you to actually, from within a CI/CD pipeline, communicate back with the main Invicti ASPM servers and say, hey, I'd like to kick off a scan, or I'd like to check the posture of this. I'd like to verify that when I'm building my code that it is secure, instead of waiting later on. And there's also a great set of documentation that is out there that Cenk and team have put together, which are a series of recipes. So all the little bits of YAML, all the little bits of configuration that one needs to be able to sprinkle that magic into pipelines to make sure that it is getting checked as soon as that commit happens, as soon as that push to a shared branch happens, and not way later. It's much more fun for everybody involved when security flaws get fixed very quickly, very quietly, and it's a good day, right? Fewer meetings.
You don't want customers, scanning and bringing you a bunch of reports and yelling at you. I thought that's what everyone wants.
It's orders of magnitude faster, cheaper, and better to fix it earlier.
Yep, absolutely.
So, guys, we are starting to run a little bit long on time, but I did want to ask a question. As a founder, Cenk, it's always kind of fun to kind of grow a seed and kind of bring something to fruition. What is one of your favorite memories from the startup days prior to the acquisition that you want to share with us?
So this is it's not easy to answer this question, but I have a few. So. I think the first big or international customer that we were able to land was one of the important milestones for us, because we start a small team and we test waters or landed on the customers in our local market to prove that the tool is working or the product is working. And it was during the COVID time, and we were able to land our first international customer from the US without even meeting with the team. I remember that. Did we really land this customer without having literal meeting with them? So even the new work culture, Zoom working culture was new for us. And I remember calling my co-founder John, that they are all done. And then we had a company event after that meeting, which became a regular. And till today, we regularly meet as a team. And yeah, I would say this was one of the most important milestone or memory that I still remember today.
That's nice.
I think that goes to show, like, especially you're saying, is like you really didn't have to like go in person and meet them, and they could see the value of the solution, pretty immediately, I would say, right? If they're going through that much and have that much trust, and that's huge, and it's really cool to see that that's it's definitely a huge milestone.
And from an startup founder perspective, it was important in a few different reasons. This is in first international customers coming from the US, which was an important market as well. And it was during the COVID time. The work culture was also shifting, so everything was new to us. And I would say it was an important milestone for us. Yeah.
All right, excellent. Well, just want to say thanks to everyone who contributed to this episode. Cenk, it's wonderful to have you on. Ryan, as always, it's great. To those behind the scenes who make the magic happen, thank you very much. But thanks most of all to you, our listener. And this has been another episode of AppSec Serialized. Thank you.